Okay, I'm doing this one because, well, it's been on my mind for a long time, and it's way out of date in some ways. Maybe not terribly topical, but I've been bothered by certain aspects of, I don't know, I guess you could say political correctness in particular, and I decided, well, my hair kind of triggered it off for me in a lot of ways. I don't know if you can even see it in this. I assume you can. But I've always been a fan of wearing costumes of various types. And although I've never felt the desire to, you know, well, how do I put this? I like to impersonate people of an era, of a time, of a place. And I've almost always made that outside of sort of fantasy type creatures, things that were actually more of my cultural background to some extent or another, you know. So I would often, you know, dress in something medieval or sometimes like a pirate or whatever, you know, and not necessarily anything great, just something that appealed to me in that, or military uniforms that were reminiscent of another era. However, just because my taste didn't run in certain directions doesn't mean that it might not have. And in particular, what I'm thinking of here is, well, what if I decided I wanted, you know, to look like a black man of a certain period in time? And now, clearly, blackface would be wrong. Even sort of a tasteful sort of blackface. The hair was making me toy a little bit along the lines of Admiral Barbarossa, but he was Greek and probably not all that dark, even though he was, you know, Lord of Algiers and North Africa for the most part. And this beautiful item is something my dad picked up for me in Morocco. I haven't really gotten a chance to wear it. I think I wore it for a video before, but it's kind of impractical for me, largely because it's a little too long to dance in, and I'm afraid I'll damage it. And, you know, I have a West African shirt though that I wear quite often, and I've worn it usually not in some sort of West African type of outfit. I've worn it, you know, in very medieval style at times, and also in some other outfits that I like that aren't clearly that. But it just leads me to a number of things on the PC side. So one is, hey, what about blackface? What about drag? You know, how come when a guy dresses up in drag, that's not seen as sort of making fun of females somehow, you know? And I'm not necessarily talking, I'm definitely not talking about a drag queen here, although to some extent, a drag queen is closer to what I'm doing, where I'm feeling like I'm taking on a persona and playing it out. And I think that's what a lot of the drag queens are doing. Now, why aren't they getting heat, you know, from females for that? What if somebody really wanted to see themselves as black? Would it be wrong for them to, you know, start darkening their skin to the point where they looked, you know, at least mixed race? And you're getting into, you know, some really subtle semantics here. I mean, obviously, the pure blackface, I understand the problem with that, which is, you know, the minstrel shows and that kind of stuff. However, there's also this anti-cultural appropriation, which is why I chose this particular outfit. And the beard actually also goes with that because, say, I wanted to be a Viking. Well, dyeing my hair red would be, sort of fitting a stereotype for Vikings, Other things like the horned helmet, that's making fun of Vikings. They didn't wear that. Would that be okay? Would that be wrong? What am I doing there? Am I making fun of their heritage? Now, I'll tell you this much. Your Norse people would not really care, right? And in the same way that women don't feel offended by, someone dressing in drag necessarily. Some may, but they're probably along the same lines as men who feel offended by someone dressing in drag. They're like, ooh, that's just weird, whatever, right? But the problem here is that there's multiple lines that you have to look at. Is my wearing this terrible? And under what circumstances does it become terrible? Is a woman who dresses as a geisha, and I know that gets hit for cultural appropriation in a certain sense, is that a problem? And why? I mean, someone who's not, not of that culture at all, but wants to do it as a costume, or maybe even wants to play that whole role in her own mind as a fantasy for a while, and does it make a difference between those two? And as with all my rants, these are things that trouble me not terribly much, even if they might seem like they do. It's just a matter that I feel like we're losing something to this kind of oversensitivity, and that's I'm expressing the oversensitivity in a sense here, but I'm also somewhat callous to it in the sense that if I want to do something, I'm damn well going to do it. However, I could see myself getting in trouble. There was a professor who got in trouble for making a point with the blackface recently. I think actually from here. It was a few years before I came back. But where it was, she got suspended, put on leave. I don't know if she got removed completely, whatever. But, this was a big deal because she hosted a party. Now, she was very sensitive to these issues and was actually trying to make a specific point with it, but then there was blackface is never okay. Well, why not? Why not? What if I'm playing Othello in a play? Am I forbidden that now? Do I have to be a white Othello? Is that, I'm not saying, that there wouldn't be equally capable black people who could play the role. It's just sometimes you're in a community or whatever and there isn't someone to take that role. And then does it make sense to change things for that sensitivity, or can it be done tastefully? I guess is really the point. Can it be done tastefully? Can it be done in a way that would not cause any problem? And why not? Where is the line? I mean, the minstrel show blackface is one thing. Now, I would still say that's fair game. Fair game. Why? Because if you wanted to play someone who's in a minstrel show, that is what you would have to wear. And why is it that certain characters are no longer allowed? Now, I can understand characterizing black people as someone from a minstrel show is wrong, but characterizing someone who's in a minstrel show might be of some importance. It certainly would be important in a realistic movie about someone who works in that role. And is that forbidden now? Is that just something we can no longer look at? why is that something we can no longer look at? Can we no longer, are there just things that are no longer possible to look at through any reasonable lens any longer, simply because of a cultural sensitivity and that makes that just a verboten topic? And doesn't that seem worse than being able to look at it honestly and fairly? I'm not talking about my costuming here, which is really just for my fun. Although that's where it kind of settles, is, what if I wanted to see myself as, I don't know, as a ruler of Zimbabwe for a day, for some reason. And are there gradations there? What if I want to be Jesus? Okay, you could say, hey, that's pretty damn insensitive to Christians, but it really isn't to most, right? I mean, there may be some who really do see, dressing up as Jesus for Halloween, that would be pretty nasty. Okay, what if it's not Jesus? What if it's, one of the disciples, and maybe not even one of the 12, just a disciple from that period? Someone, or what if it's a Maccabee? Is that terrible? And would it make a difference if I'm Jewish or not? Could I darken my skin for that to a more Middle Eastern texture and coloration? Or if I was a darker skinned person, could I lighten my skin for the role of, say, the Viking or whatever? Or would that just be wrong? And these are the kind of things that I just play with in my head, and I'm like, Jesus, I can understand wanting to be sensitive, but I also feel like we're losing something that is an expressivity that maybe is not anywhere near as important. But it seems a little unfair. It seems like we're throwing out something enjoyable, something pleasant, a bit of that really isn't intended to do any harm, and probably wouldn't do any harm in an earlier period. I want to be careful there, because that's, it all depends on how you do it, right? It depends on, like I say, if you wanted to go out as someone from a minstrel show wearing blackface, you're not really making fun of the black person the way the person in the minstrel show was, but boy, you're sure, asking for it, I think, in some ways at that point. But on the other hand, if I darkened my skin to a way that you couldn't even tell, it looked like it was a natural skin darkening, What if I make my skin orange? Will Cheetos be unhappy with me? I mean, I only know of one, but it's just it's the kind of thing, and this is like all my rants. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's not like I'm going to come to any kind of solution here, and I'll probably get some heat from one side or another, or maybe both sides for for maybe being too sensitive and not sensitive enough at the same time. But the truth is that I don't feel like the thoughts that I have are ones that are terribly anti-anyone. I mean, if I want to take on and play a role of, I don't know, a French nobleman, am I making fun of the French that way? Does it matter that I may or may not have some French in me? Does it matter that that's indistinguishable? Like, I'm not making any skin color changes? Does it matter if I make hair color changes? Is that important? What if I dye my hair like I did, because my wife, in part because my wife doesn't like the gray, and the forget the red, but let's say I just, went for a natural color. Am I somehow appropriating youth that way? What if I dye it white? Am I appropriating age? I mean, it's just, it seems so crazy. It seems like a can of worms has been opened with all of this that could know no boundaries, that the fears of antagonizing or offending someone, and pretty much anything you do could offend someone, are too restrictive, to our activities, and it really feels like we've gone to a hypersensitive level, to the point where, similar to some language usage, where we can't use certain words in certain contexts, or at all, even in some cases, right? I mean, there are words we just cannot use, even in sort of a joking fashion. There are jokes we can't make anymore. Now, could those jokes have been harmful? Could they? I think it depends on the context. I mean, I know plenty of Italian jokes. Is it terrible for me to tell them? I don't even know anymore. Certainly it doesn't really affect me too much. The main thing that affects me is that, gosh, there aren't too many people left who remember World War II at all. And, that whole era has kind of passed. So, like, all these old war jokes that I know, they're not going to work very well anymore. And like I said, I know I'm not alone in this overall problem of, geez, the PC-ness is ridiculous. It's gotten to the point where we're so afraid of offending someone in what we say. And it's not just a matter, it's gone beyond, well, geez, I really shouldn't make that joke at work, to maybe I shouldn't make that joke publicly, or I might suffer at work, right? And the lines are harder and harder to find, and it becomes more and more of a, and you see this, over at BGG certainly, where the righteousness police have gone crazy from what I hear. I stay out of everywhere where they discuss anything relating to anything, really. Apparently, from what I've heard, apparently it's just become so leftist there that it's crazy. But there's, to some extent, that's what some of the Trump backlash was. Some of what people wanted about Trump was, he's willing to insult people. He's willing to make fun of, the handicapped person. I don't want to use the incorrect terminology here. The differently abled person, the one reporter. And, yes, honestly, I can't remember a time in my lifetime where politicians would do that publicly. There were certain limits that were polite limits, right? That you just didn't do, but you might do it privately in a joke or something, especially if it's not directed at a certain person. What he did in that particular case was just so horrible because he's directing it at one person with a disability, and but in a sense there's this well, good for him from a lot of people, and you can kind of see it. It's just that the line has been crossed way too far. What used to be a political correctness was just sort of a common sense decency, and now it's gone to, you know what, if you're that, and it used to just be that somebody who was that indecent in public was scorned. You know, the community as a whole just kind of, yeah, whatever. But then we got to this period where jokes became cruder, and this kind of thing became more and more of this kind of. I still think it's kind of a backlash that's been happening throughout, as these things became less and less acceptable. They became more and more acceptable publicly, and to the point where now we can have a president who goes out and says the most, nearly obscene things, and no big deal, Yet, and it disturbs the hell out of some people. There's no question. It's always gonna, it was always gonna do that. But it's almost like what would have been disqualifying before has become not disqualifying because of how far the line was being pushed anyway, as to what was no longer acceptable. It's just become so restraining that it's like almost a liberating rallying cry. And I wonder how much of that goes to other things too, like the white nationalism stuff, whether or not that flag is being unfurled a little bit stronger and growing more adherence just because things that once were slowly turning away, slowly becoming less and less acceptable. Once upon a time, some stuff that's, unbelievably foul and, was completely acceptable, and then it became unacceptable. But then that line just kept moving further and further to a certain breaking point where now almost that foulness is become the reverberation against it, saying, you know what? Fuck you, man. I'm going to do this anyway, and I'm going to do it worse than worse than my parents did. I'm going to do it the way Granddaddy would have done it. And I don't know. I really don't know. Where it's almost flashed back to becoming a statement of real political and social intent rather than what might have just been an ignorant harm to some, has now become a willful and intentional harm to more. I'm not sure. This didn't go quite where I wanted it to. I never know where things are going to go. And I'm not sure, like I said, I don't know that these things ever go anywhere valuable or valid. But they're just these heartfelt kind of wanderings of my mind that when I do start rambling on something, yeah, they go there. Cheers then.